armor, though ornate, is flimsy. It can be pierced easily. We know their weaknesses, men. With the right tactics, we will break them.
What if I told you that Western civilization as we know it could have disappeared in a single day? The history we are taught in school often overlooks the fact that the Greeks' victory was not just unlikely, it was practically impossible from the perspective of the logic of the time.
We thin the center to draw them in. Hold the flank.
This was not a battle between two equal armies. It was a clash between a tiny city-state and the most powerful military machine the world had ever seen. The Persian Empire was undefeated, absorbing nations and erasing borders, turning kings into slaves with a wave of its hand. Athens, on the other hand, was divided from within, full of traitors and fear of the coming storm. But it was at this moment, on the hot sand of the Marathon Beach, that something happened that changed the course of history. Ordinary citizens, farmers, and potters took up their shields not for the king, but for the right to decide their own fate. Watch the video to the end to find out how the daring plan of one disgraced commander saved Europe from complete enslavement. What if I told you that everything you believed about the power of ancient empires is untrue because you cannot imagine their true scale? The Persian Empire of the Achaemenids was not just a state, it was a colossus stretching from India to the Balkans. Darius I, King of Kings, ruled over millions of subjects, and his word was law for dozens of nations. For the Persians, the campaign against Greece was not a great war, but rather a punitive expedition to the edge of the world. They did not see the Greeks as a serious opponent capable of offering real resistance. The imperial machine worked flawlessly, crushing any attempts at disobedience. The Persian army was multinational, serving the best warriors of the conquered countries, from the Egyptians to the Scythians. Their equipment, logistics, and numbers inspired awe in anyone who dared to challenge them. Persian gold opened city gates faster than battering rams, and their fleet dominated the seas. No one in their right mind could imagine that the scattered Greek city-states would be able to resist. Darius demanded earth and water, a symbol of complete submission and recognition of his supreme authority. Many Greek islands and cities, seeing the power of the Persian fleet, surrendered without resistance, preferring slavery to destruction. Fear was the empire's main weapon, and it worked flawlessly, paralyzing the will to resist even before the battle began. The Athenians and Spartans, however, threw the envoys into a well and a pit, saying that there they would find both land and water. This insult could not go unpunished, as it called into question the authority of Darius himself. The emperor ordered his generals, Datis and Artaphernes, to wipe Athens off the face of the earth and bring its inhabitants in chains. A fleet of 600 ships carrying tens of thousands of soldiers and cavalry set sail across the Aegean Sea. It was a force capable of crushing any walls and breaking any army. Along the way, the Persians demonstratively destroyed the city of Eretria, which dared to resist. The temples were burned, and the inhabitants, as promised, were enslaved and sent deep into Asia. The smoke from burning Eretria was visible from afar and served as a clear warning to Athens. The fate of their neighbors showed that mercy was not to be expected, and the choice was between death and bondage. The landing took place in Marathon Bay, just 42 kilometers from Athens. The location was ideal for the Persian cavalry, a wide plain where the horsemen could turn around and destroy the infantry. The Persian commanders were confident in their strategy and calmly prepared for an easy victory. They set up camp, unloaded their supplies, and waited for fear to do its work. Among the Persian advisors was the former Athenian tyrant Hippias, who had been expelled by his people many years earlier. He dreamed of regaining power with the help of the Persians and actively assisted the enemy by pointing out the best places to land. Betrayal was a tangible factor, and the Persians counted on the help of their supporters within Athens itself. They hoped that the city would surrender without a fight as soon as it saw the hopelessness of its situation. Persian warriors, the immortals and archers, were masters of ranged combat. They were accustomed to showering the enemy with a hail of arrows, breaking their formation before hand-to-hand combat. Their tactics had been honed in hundreds of battles and almost never failed. Against the heavy Greek phalanx, they planned to use maneuverability and numerical superiority. The Athenians found themselves facing destruction, realizing that there was practically no help to be expected. Sparta, their main military ally, refused to act immediately because of a religious holiday. Athens was left alone to face the giant that had come for their freedom. At that moment, history stood still, awaiting an outcome that seemed a foregone conclusion. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. Do you think modern superpowers act in the same way as the ancient Persian Empire? Or have their methods changed? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about what was happening outside the walls of Athens before the battle? The city was not seething with heroism, as later chroniclers like to portray it, but with panic, fear, and political intrigue. Democracy was still young and fragile, like a delicate sprout that had broken through in the place of the overthrown tyranny. Many influential families were nostalgic for the days of Hippias, when power belonged to a few, not to the whole people. These people were ready to open the gates to the Persians, hoping that with a foreign army, their lost influence would return. In secret rooms behind closed windows, supporters of the exiled tyrant were preparing a coup, waiting for only one thing: a signal from the Persian corps that had landed at Marathon. Athens stood on the brink of disaster, and any wrong move could lead to the destruction of the state. At the military council of 10 strategists, the atmosphere was tense to the limit. Opinions were evenly divided. 5 called for staying behind the walls and preparing for defense, while 5 demanded to go out into the field and attack first. The walls of Athens were indeed strong, but defense gave traitors enormous opportunities. Once the siege began, hunger, fear, and rumors could destroy the city from within. Going out into the field meant risking everything for a single blow that could result in either the greatest victory or complete destruction. Never before had the fate of the polis hung by such a fragile thread. Meanwhile, the Persians were fortifying themselves on the Marathon plain, building up their forces and constructing fortifications from stakes and shields. Every day their camp grew, and the tension in Athens increased. The Athenian army, 10,000 citizen militiamen, was not an army of professionals, but people forced to become warriors. They were farmers, craftsmen, and merchants who bought their own armor and weapons. Each of them understood that if the army fell, their families would be left defenseless against Darius' fury, and the city itself would be turned into a slave market. Every strategist felt the weight of the decision almost physically. To stay and wait meant condemning Athens to slow suffocation from within, allowing fear and betrayal to take root. To leave meant to challenge a force that outnumbered them many times over. It was a choice between a quick end and a painful agony. And there was less and less time to think. The Persian ships could bypass Cape Sunion and strike the city itself if the army left too late. The decisive voice belonged to the Archon Polemarch Callimachus, a man who had no right to make a mistake. He was pressured, persuaded, and threatened. Some said that going out into the field was madness, while others argued that the honor of Athens would die if they hid behind the walls. At this turning point, a man whose words changed history forever stepped forward. The strategist Miltiades. He passionately argued that only courage could break the spirit of the traitors, that only a strike could destroy the Persians' plan and give the initiative back to the Greeks. He said that if the Athenians showed cowardice, the city would rot from within faster than Persian arrows could strike it. His words were the spark that ignited Callimachus's decision, and he said, "Let's go." The Athenian army, consisting of about 10,000 hoplites, advanced towards Marathon. Soon they were joined by 1,000 Plataeans, a small number, but a huge gift in terms of significance. Their alliance was a symbol that the Greeks, despite their internal strife, could unite against a common enemy. 11,000 free men, armed with bronze, spears, and an unyielding will, marched toward tens of thousands of subjects of the Persian Empire. They knew their chances were slim, but they also understood that there was nowhere to retreat. The road to Marathon was difficult. Heat, dust, narrow mountain paths, heavy armor and shields, the weight of which was felt with every kilometer. But no one complained. They did not march for the king or at the command of a tyrant. They marched for their homes, their children, and the freedom that was just beginning to spread its wings in their city. When they arrived at the Marathon heights, a frightening picture unfolded before them. a huge Persian camp, countless tents, horses, rows of warehouses, and hundreds of ships in the bay. Darius' army looked like a sea of metal and fabric, colorful, noisy, confident. But the Greeks took up advantageous positions in the mountains, blocking the exits from the plain and forcing the Persians to either attack in unfavorable conditions or wait. A difficult psychological duel began, a tedious, exhausting wait, where every day worked in favor of the strongest and every fear worked in favor of the traitor inside the city. And here's a question that depends only on you. Would you open the gates to the enemy to save your family from slaughter? Or would you go out into the field to fight to the last, risking losing everything? In the next chapter, you will learn about a man who changed not only the course of the battle, but also the fate of the Western world. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of the role of the individual in history? The victory at Marathon has a name, and that name is Miltiades. He was not a typical Athenian politician giving beautiful speeches in the agora. Miltiades was a warrior and aristocrat who lived for many years on the borders of the empire and even served Darius himself. He knew the Persians not from hearsay. He fought in their ranks, knew their tactics, their strengths and weaknesses. Miltiades grew up in an environment where constant danger was the norm, and this tempered his character. He saw how the Persians organized their campaigns, how they distributed their forces, and how they reacted to resistance. He understood that for them, war was more of a huge administrative machine than a matter of personal courage. This experience gave him a much better understanding of what frightened such opponents and what left them vulnerable. Miltiades understood that the Persian army, despite its formidable reputation, had vulnerabilities. He knew that their infantry carried light-woven shields and cloth armor that could not stop a Greek spear. He knew that their main strength lay in their cavalry and archers, and that if these advantages could be neutralized, the Greeks would have a chance. His experience made him a unique and indispensable leader at this critical moment. He understood particularly well the difference between the heavy Greek phalanx and the light Persian infantry. The Hellenes were trained to stand shoulder to shoulder, maintaining their formation even under heavy pressure, while the Persian warriors relied on maneuverability and ranged combat. This difference meant that with the right tactics, the heavy armor of the Greeks could be a decisive factor. Miltiades was counting on just that. But in democratic Athens, Miltiades had many enemies. He was considered a tyrant by nature, a man accustomed to autocratic power. Many strategists did not trust him, fearing that after victory he would seize power in the city. Miltiades had to fight not only the Persians, but also the distrust of his own citizens, convincing them to accept his plan. His past, associated with his rule over Chersonesos, made him a suspicious figure to those who jealously guarded Athenian democracy. People remembered that he came from a family where tyrannical tendencies were considered commonplace. He understood that without the support of the citizens, he would not be able to carry out his plan. Therefore, Miltiades was forced to be patient and persuade people again and again. His plan was bold and risky, violating all the canons of Greek military art. Usually, the phalanx was built evenly, with rows of equal depth across the entire front. Miltiades, however, proposed deliberately weakening the center, leaving only a few rows of soldiers there. Instead, he strengthened the flanks as much as possible, turning them into powerful striking forces. To ancient Greek strategists, such a decision seemed almost insane. Troops always tried to keep the line strong because a breakthrough in the center could lead to the destruction of the entire army. But Miltiades saw beyond tradition and understood that the Persians did not expect such tactics from the Greeks. He deliberately broke the mold to force the enemy to act as he wanted them to. The idea was to lure the Persians into a trap. Miltiades hoped that the enemy, seeing a weak center, would throw their best forces there to break through the formation. This would allow the Greek flanks to close in and surround the Persian army, depriving it of the ability to maneuver. It was a classic Cannae strategy, devised long before Hannibal, but it required iron discipline. The Greeks had to act as a single mechanism for this plan to work. Any premature movement or panic could ruin the plan. Miltiades understood that he needed not only calculation, but also fighters who were willing to trust his experience. The Hellenes went into battle not for glory, but to defend their land, and this made their determination particularly strong. Miltiades walked among the ranks of soldiers for hours, explaining the task to them and instilling confidence. He spoke to them not as a politician, but as a veteran who knew the smell of blood and dust. He convinced them that Persian gold was soft and their iron was of poor quality. His charisma and confidence were contagious, making people believe in the impossible. He told the soldiers how he had seen Persian armor himself and how easily it could be pierced. He shared his memories of how the Persians behaved in battle, how they often relied on intimidation rather than resilience. Such frank words from a man who knew the enemy from the inside had a stronger effect on the soldiers than any speech in the square. They felt that they were being led by a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Every day of waiting worked against the Greeks, but Miltiades waited for the perfect moment. He watched the enemy's movements, every ship in the bay, every cavalry unit. He needed the Persians to make a mistake, and he was ready to punish them for it instantly. He was a predator lying in wait. Athens could not keep its army away from the fields and homes for long because the men were needed on the farm, so time was really working against them. But Miltiades understood that haste could cost them their lives. He noticed the slightest changes in the layout of the Persian camp and waited for the moment when the enemy would let their guard down. When the day of battle came, it was Miltiades' voice that gave the signal for thousands of men to attack. He took full responsibility for the outcome of the battle. In case of defeat, his name would be cursed forever, but in case of victory, he would become the savior of Hellas. It was a lifelong gamble. The soldiers knew that Miltiades' decisions were not random, and so they rushed forward with rare unanimity. They had to cover kilometers under the arrows of Persian archers to engage in hand-to-hand combat, where their heavy armor gave them an advantage. This attack became a symbol of the determination of free people who did not want to submit to foreign rule. Miltiades' ability to adapt and use his knowledge of the enemy against him was the decisive factor. He proved that intelligence and experience can compensate for a lack of brute force. His genius turned a hopeless situation into a triumph of tactical thinking. The victory at Marathon showed that determination and competent leadership can change the course of history. It was a turning point that instilled confidence in the Greeks that powerful Persia was not invincible. Miltiades demonstrated that sometimes one person can inspire an entire nation to achieve greatness. Like this video if you also appreciate strategic thinking and unconventional solutions. Guess what happened next when the two armies locked eyes? Geography often determines the outcome of battles before the first sword is drawn, and Marathon was no exception. The plain was a narrow strip of land between the mountains and the sea, bordered on both sides by marshes. This location was chosen by the Persians for their cavalry maneuvers, but it also became their trap. The Greeks blocked the only exit from the plain towards Athens, trapping the enemy on the beach. For several days, the armies stood facing each other without taking any active action. The Persians did not want to storm the fortified positions of the Greeks on the heights, where the phalanx had the advantage. The Greeks, in turn, did not descend onto the plain, fearing the Persian cavalry, which could easily outflank them. It was a tense standoff, a war of nerves under the scorching sun. The Greek hoplites suffered from the heat in their heavy armor, but did not take it off day or night. They saw the Persians burning fires and heard their foreign language and prayers. Anxiety was also growing in the Persian camp. Why weren't these handfuls of Greeks fleeing at the sight of the great army? The waiting was more exhausting than the fighting. The Marathon plain was covered with vineyards and sparse trees, which created additional obstacles. Miltiades ordered more trees to be cut down and barricades to be erected on the flanks. This was to hinder the enemy cavalry if they decided to attack. Every bush and every stone became part of the defensive line. The Persians, accustomed to the vast expanses of Asia, felt uncomfortable, squeezed between the mountains and the sea. Their numerical superiority did not play a decisive role here, as the narrow front did not allow them to deploy all their forces at once. The empire found itself in a bottleneck, and the cork was made of Athenian bronze. Supplying the huge army also became a problem with each day of inactivity. The Persian command began to realize that time was working against them. Rumors of the Spartan approach could reach them through spies. They either had to defeat the Athenians here and now or change their plan. And then they made a fateful decision. They decided to divide their forces. Part of the army was to remain and engage the Greeks in battle, while the cavalry and part of the infantry were to board the ships. The fleet was to sail around Attica and attack the defenseless Athens from the sea. It was a cunning plan that could bring victory without a general battle, but Greek observers from the heights noticed strange movements in the enemy camp. At night, they heard the creaking of oars and the neighing of horses being led onto ships. In the morning, it became clear the most terrible threat, the Persian cavalry, had disappeared from the battlefield. The moment Miltiades had been waiting for had arrived. Have you ever been to Greece and seen these mountains and the sea? In the next chapter, you will see how the Greeks coped with the frightening calm before the storm. This is one of the most mysterious moments in the history of Marathon, which historians have been arguing about for 2,500 years. Where did the Persian cavalry, the empire's main striking force, go? At the key moment of the battle, there is no mention of the actions of the horsemen in ancient sources. The phrase, "no horses," became the signal for the Greeks to begin their attack. Even ancient authors wondered where those who usually determine the outcome of battles in favor of Persia could have disappeared to. The warriors capable of breaking the enemy's formation with a single swift flanking strike seemed to have vanished before the decisive moment. This lack of explanation gave rise to many hypotheses, but the more the details of the battle are studied, the clearer it becomes that the disappearance of the cavalry was no accident. The most likely version is that Datis and Artaphernes, tired of waiting, began to transfer the cavalry to ships. Loading horses is a complex and lengthy process that requires calm and time. The animals had to be led onto unstable gangways and placed in cramped holds. At this moment, the army was most vulnerable, as its most mobile part was out of action. This decision may have been related to the fact that the Persians were preparing for a flanking maneuver and wanted to launch a surprise attack on Athens itself. They may have needed the horses for a rapid landing elsewhere. However, their desire to speed up the campaign worked against them. The time they spent loading became the window of opportunity that Miltiades had been counting on. The Persians believed that the Greeks would not dare to come down from the hills and attack them on the plain. They considered the Athenians too cautious and fearful. This underestimation of the enemy proved to be a fatal mistake. As soon as scouts reported to Miltiades that the ships with horses were sailing away, he realized that it was now or never. For the Persians, such an attack was unthinkable, as the Greek army seemed too small and too focused on defense. They were sure that the Athenians would prefer to wait and keep their distance. But Miltiades knew that delay would put the city at risk, and when fate itself opened the door, he did not hesitate. Without cavalry, the Persian infantry lost its main flank cover. Lightly armed archers and infantrymen were left alone against the bronze-clad hoplites. The balance of power on the battlefield changed instantly, although the Persians still had overwhelming numerical superiority. The Persians understood perfectly well that without horsemen, their formation would be less resistant to a decisive attack. Archers could shoot at the enemy, but they could not stop the dense wall of shields and spears advancing forward. The Greeks knew that their chance was fleeting and that they had to seize it before the Persians could regroup. Miltiades ordered his troops to form a battle line, stretching the phalanx to match the width of the Persian formation. This was done to avoid encirclement, which the Greeks feared most. The center of the phalanx was thinned to the limit, with only a few rows of shields. It was a calculated risk that had to be taken for the sake of the length of the front. Such a tactic required absolute confidence in the men who stood in the weak center. They understood that the main blow would fall on them, but they also knew that their task was to hold out for just a few minutes until the powerful flanks closed in and turned the tide of battle. Such self-sacrifice was a rare display of discipline even by Greek standards. Sacrifices were made, and the omens were interpreted as favorable. The soldiers checked the fastenings of their greaves, tightened their helmet straps, and took up their heavy dory spears. A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the sound of the surf and distant shouts of commands in Persian. This silence was not fear, but the concentration of people who understood that the fate of the city depended on their steadfastness. They felt the salty smell of the sea, the dry heat of the sun, and the weight of bronze on their shoulders. All this reminded them that what awaited them was not just a battle, but a test that would go down in legend. The Greeks understood that once they left their fortified positions, there would be no turning back. On the plain, either glorious victory or death under a hail of arrows awaited them. But the sight of the departing ships gave them strength. The enemy was divided. The enemy was vulnerable. The Athenians saw that their opponents had lost confidence, and this opened up a chance for them to save not only their army, but their entire city-state. It was not events that decided their fate, but how they interpreted them. When they realized that the enemy had made a mistake, fear gave way to determination. It was a moment of truth for Athenian democracy. The decision to attack was made collectively and carried out with iron discipline. Each hoplite knew his place in the ranks and his neighbor whom he had to protect with his shield. The collective decision gave them strength, for each understood that he was not simply in an army, but in a people's army defending his own freedom. The awareness of responsibility for their homeland made them steadfast, and this determination turned even the most dangerous maneuvers into actions performed with confidence. The sudden disappearance of the cavalry turned a complex tactical task into a simple equation of speed and impact. Now everything depended on whether the Greeks could cover the distance to the enemy faster than the Persian archers could shoot them down. The race with death began. But it is in such races that willpower is revealed. The Greeks knew that every step brought them closer to the limit of their abilities. However, they also knew that their heavy armor and training would give them an advantage when they closed in on the enemy, and so they ran forward, not letting fear get the better of them. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how this attack began? Contrary to all the rules of military science at the time, the Greek phalanx did not march, but ran. Imagine thousands of men clad in 30 kilograms of bronze running under the scorching sun. It was unthinkable, it was madness, but it was their only chance of survival. The distance between the armies was about a mile, a death zone covered by archers. Persian bows were powerful weapons capable of piercing light armor and inflicting terrible wounds. If the Greeks had marched at a slow pace as usual, they would simply not have reached the enemy lines, turning themselves into living targets. The Persians, seeing the Greeks running towards them, decided that they had gone mad. They had never seen heavy infantry attack at a run without the support of cavalry and archers. In their eyes, it looked like mass suicide. They prepared to shoot these madmen, confident of an easy victory. But the hoplites' run had another purpose: the momentum of the strike. The accelerating mass of metal-clad bodies possessed enormous kinetic energy. When the phalanx crashed into the Persian formation, the effect was like a train colliding with a wall. The front ranks of the Persians were simply swept away, knocked down, and trampled. The sound of the collision was terrifying. The crack of breaking spears, the clang of swords against bronze, cries of rage and pain. Dust rose in a cloud, hiding the combatants from view. A brutal slaughter began, where the long Greek spears gave them an advantage over the short Persian swords and daggers. The Athenians did not just run fast, they maintained their formation, which required incredible training and discipline. Breaking formation would mean death, so everyone held on to their neighbor. It was a single living creature, bristling with spearheads, rushing towards the enemy. Persian arrows bounced off bronze shields and helmets or got stuck in them without causing serious damage. The speed of the approach prevented the archers from firing enough volleys. The empire's main trump card was defeated by simple physics and the fury of free men. This came as a shock to the Persians. They were used to seeing fear in the eyes of their enemies, but here they saw only cold determination to kill. Their woven shields were smashed to splinters under the blows of the Greek hoplites. The light infantry proved powerless in close combat against the armored wall. This run went down in history as the army's marathon run. It proved that morale and physical training can overcome technical superiority. The Greeks didn't just run, they crashed into the enemy with the force of a hurricane. Could you run a mile in 30-kilogram gear, knowing that a deadly battle awaits you at the end? In the next chapter, you will learn how the battle actually unfolded. The battle unfolded exactly as Miltiades had predicted, as if following a script written in blood. The Persian center, where the empire's elite troops, Persians and Scythians, stood through all its might at the weakened Greek center. The thin line of hoplites buckled under the pressure and began to retreat inland. The Persians, jubilant and thinking that victory was already in their hands, rushed to pursue the retreating Greeks. pushing deeper and deeper. However, this retreat did not turn into a rout. The Greek center, although suffering losses, continued to hold its formation, luring the enemy into a trap. At the same time, a completely different picture was unfolding on the flanks. The reinforced wings of the Athenian army, where the most experienced warriors stood, clashed with the weaker parts of the Persian army. The heavy Greek phalanx on the flanks crushed the enemy's light infantry, putting them to flight. But instead of pursuing the fleeing enemy, as undisciplined armies usually did, the Greek wings stopped. At the command of their leaders, they turned 90 degrees inward, facing the center of the battle. The trap snapped shut. The Persian elite troops that had broken through the center suddenly found themselves surrounded. Walls of shields and spears closed in on them from the left and right. The victorious cry was replaced by screams of terror. The crowd, squeezed into a confined space, lost the ability to maneuver and fight. The rear ranks pressed against the front, creating a crush and chaos. A methodical destruction began. The Greeks tightened the ring, wielding their spears like death machines. The Persians, deprived of their advantages in ranged combat, died by the thousands. Their light armor left them no chance in this meat grinder. Panic seized the army of the King of Kings, and it rushed toward the sea, toward the saving ships. The Greeks pursued them to the water's edge, cutting them down from behind. The marshes at the edge of the plain became a grave for many who lost their way in the smoke and dust. The water in the bay turned red. The battle turned into a slaughter, where discipline triumphed over numbers. In the fury of the battle, the Greeks even tried to capture the Persian ships, grabbing their sides with their bare hands. It was here that the polemarch Callimachus died, whose body was later found pierced by many spears, but not retreating a single step. Cynaegirus, brother of the playwright Aeschylus, grabbed the stern of a ship and had his arm cut off with an axe. 7 Persian ships were captured, while the rest managed to sail away, taking with them the remnants of the defeated army. 6,400 Persian bodies were left on the battlefield. The Athenians lost only 192 men, an incredible ratio, testifying to the genius of Miltiades' plan. However, the joy of victory was premature. The Persian fleet did not return home, but set sail for Cape Sunion to round Attica. Their goal was clear: Athens left without protection. Traders in the city were probably already preparing to open the gates. Miltiades understood the enemy's plan. There was no time to rest and mourn the fallen. The army, which had just endured a grueling battle, had to perform another feat, no less great than the battle itself. The battle had been won, but the war could have been lost that very evening. The Persian fleet, taking advantage of the favorable wind, was heading for Phalerum, the harbor of Athens. The city was left under the protection of old men, women, and children. If the Persians had landed there before the army arrived, Athens would have fallen without a fight, and the victory at Marathon would have been meaningless. Exhausted, covered in blood, sweat, and dust, the Athenian hoplites lined up for the march. They had to walk more than 40 kilometers in full armor after several hours of hand-to-hand combat and running into battle. It was a test beyond human capabilities, but adrenaline and fear for their families drove them forward. They marched without stopping under the scorching midday sun. Their water flasks were empty, their feet were rubbed raw, and their armor chafed their shoulders raw. But no one dared to fall behind. They understood that they were participating in a race in which the life of the entire city was at stake. It was the second marathon of the day, no less heroic than the first. The commanders encouraged the soldiers, setting the pace of the march. They marched through the mountains and valleys of Attica, leaving behind the field of their glory. At that time in Athens, people looked at the horizon with horror, waiting for the appearance of sails, Greek or Persian. When the Persian fleet approached the harbor of Phalerum, Darius expected to see a defenseless city ready to surrender. He counted on an easy landing and a triumphant march. But what he saw made him freeze in amazement. On the walls and hills around Athens, gleaming with polished bronze in the rays of the setting sun, stood the same warriors who had defeated him at Marathon that morning. The Athenian army had made it. They stood leaning on their shields, ready to take on a new battle, despite their monstrous fatigue. This sight broke the spirit of the Persian command. They realized that there would be no surprise attack, and that fighting these iron men again, especially during an assault on the city, would be suicide. The Persians did not dare to land. The fleet stood for a while in the roadstead, as if not believing their eyes, and then turned around and sailed away towards Asia. Athens was saved twice in one day, first by force of arms and then by force of spirit and endurance. This forced march showed that physical training in Greek gymnasiums was not just a sport, but the basis for the survival of the nation. The hoplites proved that they were athletes not only in the stadium, but also in war. The Athenians watched the departing ships, realizing that they had performed a miracle. They defended their freedom, proving that a disciplined citizen is stronger than a slave of the empire. The history of the marathon is unthinkable without the legend of the runner who brought the news of victory and died. The name Philippides or Philippides is known to every schoolchild. According to a beautiful myth, he ran 42 kilometers from the battlefield to Athens, ran into the agora, shouted, "Rejoice, we have won!" Ninikamen, and fell dead from a broken heart. This story is so vivid and tragic that it has become a symbol of steadfastness and devotion to one's homeland. People have repeated it for centuries because it expressed the ideal of a citizen ready to give his life for the common cause. And although the plot looks almost like a scene from an ancient tragedy, that was precisely its strength. The legend became part of cultural memory, even if its details are disputed. However, reality was even more impressive than the myth. The historian Herodotus recounts that Philippides was a professional runner who was sent not to Athens, but to Sparta to ask for help before the battle. He ran 240 kilometers along mountain roads in less than 2 days. This is an incredible feat of endurance that seems almost impossible to modern man. Herodotus emphasizes that Philippides was not an ordinary soldier, but an elite courier trained to cover enormous distances without stopping. Such people served as a link between cities because sometimes the speed of news delivery determined the fate of entire states. His route lay through mountain trails where he had to contend not only with fatigue, but also with the wild landscape, heat, and lack of water. The legend of the race to Athens after the battle appeared much later, centuries later. Most likely it combined the feat of Philippides, the run to Sparta, and the forced march of the entire army back to the city. But it was this image of a lone runner giving his life for good news that became a symbol of self-sacrifice. This image was understandable to people of different eras because it is simple and emotional. One man against fatigue, time, and fate, carrying hope to those who are waiting for news. This motif became a convenient basis for the legend, which over time completely overshadowed the real content of the events. That is why the myth continued to live on, despite the lack of confirmation. The death of the runner in the legend symbolizes the extreme strain that this victory demanded of all Athenians. It is a metaphor for the fact that freedom comes at a high price, sometimes even a whole life. The phrase "we have won" became not just a report, but a legacy for posterity. Many researchers believe that the legend emphasizes the importance of the moral price of victory. Athens survived only because each of its citizens did more than was expected of them. The messenger became a symbol of a people who are ready to go to the end, even if the path leads to their own destruction. And in this mythologization lies a profound truth about war. Today, the marathon distance is an Olympic discipline, a tribute to those events. Millions of people around the world run 42 kilometers in 195 meters, often without even thinking about the fact that they are repeating the path steeped in the blood and sweat of ancient warriors. The modern marathon has become a test of human strength, spirit, and will. For many, it is a personal challenge, a way to prove to themselves that they are capable of more. And although runners enjoy comfortable clothing and sports equipment, the very idea of distance running was born out of events where it was a matter of life and death. That is why the marathon still retains a special symbolism. But it is important to remember that the real feat was accomplished by the entire army. Thousands of Philippides in heavy armor ran after a deadly battle to protect their hometown. It was collective heroism where everyone was ready to die for the common good. The hoplites ran not tens, but many kilometers in bronze armor, which could weigh more than 20 kilograms. Their legs trembled with fatigue, but they knew that delay would give the Persians a chance to land again. Therefore, they moved forward with their last ounce of strength. Their effort was no less impressive than the feat of the messenger. The image of the messenger has become a cultural code of Western civilization. It reminds us of the importance of news, the speed of information, and the fact that words can be more important than gold. In ancient times, it was fast messengers who could prevent disaster or save a city. The idea that one person can change the course of events through speed and determination has proved surprisingly enduring. It resonates with the modern world, where news, decisions, and information can also change the fate of countries. In Sparta, by the way, Phidippides arrived on time, but the Spartans were still late. They arrived on the battlefield after it was all over, looked at the corpses of the Persians, praised the Athenians, and went home. Athens received all the glory. The reason for the Spartans' delay was a religious holiday that prevented them from leaving earlier. They observed ancient laws and could not violate the established order. When they finally arrived, the battle had already been won thanks to the efforts of the Athenians. This made the Greeks' triumph even more significant. Thus, myth and reality intertwined, creating an eternal monument to human endurance. And every time someone crosses the finish line of a marathon, they touch a little bit of that ancient history. The marathon has become not only a sporting event, but also a way of communicating with the past. Those who reach the finish line feel part of a long chain of those who once fought for life, freedom, and honor. And although they run on modern streets, the memory of Phidippides continues to accompany their every step. The Battle of Marathon was a turning point in human history. If the Persians had won, Athens would have been destroyed. The golden age of Pericles would not have come. The Parthenon and the temples of the Acropolis would not have been built. The world would never have known Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Western philosophy, theater, democracy, all of this could have been stifled in its infancy. The victory gave the Greeks incredible self-confidence. They realized that an invincible empire could be defeated. This psychological breakthrough allowed them to later withstand the Second Persian invasion under Xerxes in the battles of Thermopylae and Salamis. Marathon became the foundation of the Greek spirit. For Athens itself, it was a triumph of democracy. The victory was won not by the king's professional mercenaries, but by free citizen militiamen. This reinforced the belief that a free man defending his home will always fight better than a slave driven into battle by the whip. The marathon fighters, the marathonomachy, became heroes for many generations. It was considered the highest honor to have an ancestor who stood in the ranks that day. Even the great playwright Aeschylus, in his epitaph, asked that his plays not be mentioned, but rather that he fought at Marathon. This battle demonstrated the superiority of heavy infantry in close combat over the light archers of the East. For many centuries, European military tradition relied on disciplined formations and heavy weaponry. The lessons of Miltiades were studied by commanders from Alexander the Great to Caesar. Marathon also became a lesson in how unity and determination can overcome any differences in the face of a common threat. Athens, torn by contradictions, was able to unite and survive. The 192 fallen Athenians were buried in a mound right on the battlefield, which was an exceptional honor. This mound still stands today, a silent witness to the day when a handful of brave men changed the fate of the world. The story of Marathon teaches us that numerical superiority does not guarantee victory. That strategy, knowledge of the terrain, and spirit mean more than gold and the number of soldiers. We live in a world that was largely shaped by what happened on that beach 2,500 years ago. We are the heirs of that victory, enjoying the fruits of the culture they saved. The story of the Battle of Marathon is not just a story about war. It is a reminder of what people are capable of when they defend what they love. The Athenians proved that the impossible becomes possible if there is a will to resist. Their feat has echoed through the centuries, inspiring millions of people to fight for their freedom. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. What other great battles or forgotten heroes would you like to learn the truth about? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new exciting stories.